welcome to Starbound. My name is General G, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Freyr and Remeke. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes in future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. Senior Auditor Thess had spent the better part of 4 centuries cleaning up the administrative disasters left by the third expansion wave, and she had learned to recognize the particular stench of institutional incompetence from 3 sectors away. Today's audit target reeked of it. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps headquarters hummed with the steady background noise of a bureaucracy that had grown too large for its own good. The whisper of data slates shuffling across desks, the gentle chime of notification systems that nobody bothered to silence, and the low murmur of beings who had spent so long following procedure that they'd forgotten what the procedures were meant to accomplish. Thess moved through the sterile corridors without wasted motion. Her path was direct and certain, a being who had seen this same dance in 100 other failed departments. Her current target was System Sol 3, flagged in the Frontier communication logs as non-responsive for exactly 312 standard years. The reviewing software had highlighted a discrepancy that made her chitter with irritation. Despite initial contact procedures indicating successful first transmission, an unbroken chain of Form 72 Delta submissions had been filed every quarter year since first contact. Someone had been documenting failed communications to a system that should have been integrated into galactic civilization before Thess hatched. The file manager's office occupied a corner of sub-level Gamma, down a corridor that seemed to grow narrower with each step. Kelorth of the 9th Tendril had claimed this space as his domain for longer than most species had possessed interstellar flight, and it showed. Physical data slates towered in precarious stacks that reached the ceiling, their surfaces showing a dull sheen from the patina of neglect. Holographic cues flickered and stuttered in midair, displaying priority ratings that hadn't been updated since the third expansion wave ended. Filing systems that predated the current standardization efforts occupied every available surface, their contents organized according to principles that existed only in Kelorth's increasing labyrinthine mind. Kelorth himself hunched over a desk that had been buried under paperwork sometime during the previous geological era. The subtle tremor in his foremost tendril betrayed a state the manuals called administrative concentration, though Thess suspected it was more accurately administrative panic disguised as competence. When she cleared her throat, he looked up with the expression of someone who had just realized their entire career was about to be audited. "Senior Auditor Thess," he said, his voice carrying the hollow tone of impending doom. "How may the Department of Frontier Communications assist your investigation?" "System Sol 3, Thess said without preamble. She had learned that directness was the only way to cut through bureaucratic evasion. 3 centuries of non-response reports. Initial contact logged as successful. Explain the discrepancy." Kelorth's primary tendrils coiled into tight knots, a gesture of extreme distress. His 3-fingered hands scrambled across his desk, sending data slates cascading to the floor in a minor avalanche of administrative debris. "Sol 3, yes, of course," he stammered, pulling up files that hadn't been accessed in decades. Routine case, non-compliant world, initial contact procedures followed according to Form 12 Alpha guidelines. Communications sent quarterly as required by Frontier Engagement Mandate 77 Delta. He paused. His breathing quickened, the tremor in his tendrils escalating into a full-body shudder. "The coordinates must be correct. I've been using them for centuries." Thess pulled up the transmission logs on her personal interface, cross-referencing them with the stellar cartography database. The numbers stared back at her, a cold, unyielding equation that refused to balance. "Your communications have been transmitted to the Keth Nebula. Empty space. No stellar bodies within 50 light-years of the target coordinates." The tension left Kelorth's tendrils all at once. They went limp, draping over the edge of his desk like dead vines. His skin, a mottled brown, seemed to pale. That can't be right. The original survey data is wrong. Thess's voice carried the finality of an audit conclusion. Stellar coordinates indicate System Sol 3 is located 53 light-years from your transmission target. Every diplomatic communication for 3 centuries has been sent to empty space. Kelorth's breathing apparatus made a sound like steam escaping from a cracked pressure vessel. His tendrils flailed, wrapping and unwrapping around each other in a frantic display of what the manuals called existential career dread. The sight would have been amusing if Thess hadn't seen it destroy so many careers during her decades of institutional cleanup. I need to verify Form 23 Gamma documentation procedures, Kelorth said, standing so quickly that another stack of data slates toppled. There may be supplementary filing requirements that need review. He fled from his office like a creature escaping a burning building, leaving Thess alone with 3 centuries of perfectly documented failure. She began pulling up files, looking for the original source of the error, knowing with grim certainty that this particular disaster was just beginning to unfold. Dr. Kaya Anand sat in the secure facility buried 3 miles beneath the Colorado Rockies, surrounded by computer arrays that hummed with the endless task of processing intercepted alien transmissions. The room's walls were lined with screens displaying waveform analyses, linguistic pattern models, and translation algorithms that represented 20 years of her life's work. Everything she knew about galactic civilization had been pieced together from fragments, scraps of communication pulled from the wreckage that had drifted into Earth's Oort cloud like messages from a burning library. The debris field had been humanity's first real evidence that the galaxy was not empty, and definitely not safe. The twisted metal and ceramic composites bore scorch marks from weapons that had operated on principles humanity barely understood. Whatever had destroyed the alien vessel had done so with a chilling systematic force. The ship's data cores had been damaged beyond recovery, but enough components survived to provide a technological foundation, and more importantly, cryptic evidence that interstellar civilization was a dangerous place where entire fleets could be reduced to debris clouds. Anand's team had built their understanding of galactic politics from surveillance data, intercepting fragments of transmissions and painstakingly reconstructing the context. It was detective work on a cosmic scale, trying to understand the motives and capabilities of civilizations they had never met, based on overheard conversations and technical documentation that might be decades out of date. The latest intercepts were deeply troubling. Her algorithms had finally achieved reliable translation of what appeared to be high-level military communications, and the content made her stomach clench. References to territorial adjustments and resource reallocation in Earth's galactic neighborhood appeared with disturbing frequency. Strategic documents discussed containment strategies and acceptable losses in systems within 50 light-years of Sol. Most damning were the evacuation planning documents that specifically mentioned Earth's star system. The aliens weren't just aware of humanity's existence, they were planning around it. The communications painted a picture of a galactic civilization that had been watching Earth for decades, possibly centuries, and was now implementing some kind of final solution for the human problem. Anand pulled up the latest analysis on her primary screen, reviewing the probability models her team had generated. Every metric pointed to the same conclusion. Humanity was being deliberately isolated, cut off from galactic civilization, while the aliens implemented their plans. The pattern suggested that they had perhaps 5 years before the containment phase ended and the aliens moved to active measures. She began drafting her monthly briefing for the Earth Defense Council, recommending an acceleration of the fleet construction project. The numbers were stark. Humanity's industrial capacity was already stretched to the breaking point, but the alternative was extinction. Every projection suggested that when the aliens finally revealed themselves, it would be with overwhelming force, designed to eliminate any possibility of resistance. Her report concluded with a single unambiguous recommendation: complete the fleet ahead of schedule and prepare for immediate deployment. Humanity's survival depended on being ready to fight a war they couldn't afford to lose. Admiral Farah Reese stood in her office aboard the orbital command station, looking out through reinforced transparent aluminum at the construction yards where humanity's response to the perceived alien threat took shape. The sight never failed to fill her with a mixture of pride and profound sadness. The fleet construction project represented the greatest industrial achievement in human history, and it was built on the foundation of their species' potential extinction. 50 years of preparation had transformed humanity from a single-world civilization into an industrial powerhouse, but the cost had been devastating. Earth cities choked under the brown haze of accelerated manufacturing, their skylines dominated by the massive atmospheric processors needed to support expanded production. The oceans, once blue, now carried the acidic bite of deep-sea mining operations. Entire forests had been stripped to feed the asteroid belt factories, their biomass converted into the organic components needed for shipboard life support systems. Personal freedoms had been curtailed under the Emergency Defense Acts, passed by governments that understood the species faced extinction. An entire generation had grown up knowing only wartime rationing and mandatory service. Reese herself could barely remember blue skies from her childhood, before the atmospheric processors went online and painted the world in shades of industrial necessity. She had a vague memory of her grandfather's stories about seeing the Milky Way from Earth's surface, fairy tales from a time before the orbital platforms and atmospheric haze had made the stars invisible from the ground. The ships taking shape in the construction yards weren't elegant like the alien vessels they'd studied from the Oort cloud debris. Human engineering had taken a different path, designing vessels that could survive against superior technology through redundancy, overwhelming firepower, and tactical sacrifice. Every ship in the fleet carried enough armament to sterilize a continent, built by engineers who assumed they would face technologically superior enemies and needed every possible advantage. Captain Nkem Achebe's voice crackled through the command station's communication system, reporting from the flagship Mombasa. "Admiral, Third Fleet reports ready for deployment. All vessels have completed final system checks and tactical integration procedures." Reese touched the control surface to acknowledge the transmission. Achebe was one of the best officers in the fleet, a veteran who understood both the technical requirements of space combat and the grim calculus of fighting a war where humanity would have only one chance to survive. His crews had trained for decades to fight an enemy they'd never seen, using tactics derived from fragments of alien military doctrine and humanity's own bloody history of warfare. "Acknowledged, Captain. Maintain readiness status pending Defense Council authorization." She turned back to the construction yards, where the final vessels of humanity's 10,000-ship fleet neared completion. Each ship represented years of industrial production, the labor of millions of workers, and the hopes of a species that had spent half a century preparing for an invasion that never came. The aliens' delay had allowed humanity to build up the largest military force in their history, but it had also given them time to imagine what they were about to face. Dr. Anand's latest intelligence briefing lay on Reese's desk, its conclusions stark and unambiguous. The aliens were moving towards some kind of final phase in their plans for Earth, and humanity's window for taking the initiative was closing. The fleet construction project had been designed from the beginning, with the understanding that waiting for the enemy to strike first was equivalent to accepting defeat. Kelorth's desperate search through 3 centuries of archived communications had revealed the kind of institutional failure that could destroy careers, topple administrations, and possibly trigger the first intergalactic war in 800 years. The original survey team had filed a report flagging inconsistencies in the stellar mapping data, But their concerns had been buried in the minor cartographic corrections queue and never processed. A single-digit transposition in Earth's coordinates during the chaotic third expansion wave had sent every subsequent communication to empty space, creating a perfect storm of bureaucratic incompetence. The error should have been caught by any of a dozen review procedures, but the third expansion wave had been galactic civilization's equivalent of a gold rush. Thousands of systems were being cataloged simultaneously. Survey teams were understaffed and overworked, and the administrative infrastructure simply couldn't keep pace with the rate of discovery. Corners were cut, procedures were abbreviated, and a civilization that prided itself on its careful, deliberate processes had allowed expediency to compromise its most fundamental tenets. Kelorth realized, with growing horror, that his routine quarterly reports had created an official record of Earth's non-participation in galactic affairs. 3 centuries of Form 72 Delta submissions painted a picture of a world that had been contacted according to proper procedures, but had chosen to remain outside galactic civilization. To anyone reviewing the files, Earth appeared to be deliberately isolationist. The choice facing Kelorth was simple and terrible. Admit to centuries of incompetence that would end his career and probably trigger a massive scandal, or find another explanation that preserved his position and shifted responsibility elsewhere. The decision took him exactly 12 seconds, which was probably 11 seconds longer than his conscience deserved. He filed a supplementary report suggesting that Earth's lack of response indicated possible autonomous development outside galactic oversight, requiring immediate investigation by the Department of Rogue Civilizations. The report painted Earth as a potentially dangerous world that had chosen to reject galactic integration, possibly developing military capabilities in isolation. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic deflection, transforming an administrative error into a security concern that was someone else's problem. The report was processed with a speed that galactic bureaucracy reserved for truly dangerous situations. Within hours, it had been flagged for priority review and forwarded to the appropriate security departments. Kelorth watched the file disappear into the classification system with relief and mounting dread, knowing that he had just set events in motion that could have consequences far beyond his ability to control. Supreme Coordinator Valan had overseen galactic peace for 4 centuries, and she had learned to recognize the warning signs of civilizational crisis. Kelorth's report about Earth's autonomous development carried every indicator of the kind of situation that could destabilize the carefully maintained balance of a galactic civilization. The Galactic Diplomatic Corps had been established after the last Great War to prevent exactly this scenario. Worlds developing outside the managed integration process that had maintained peace for 8 centuries. History showed that isolated civilizations either destroyed themselves through internal conflict or became aggressive threats to galactic stability. There were no exceptions in the historical record, which made Earth's apparent isolation deeply troubling. Valan authorized a comprehensive investigation, mobilizing the intelligence resources needed to assess the potential threat. The investigation revealed disturbing evidence gathered by routine surveillance operations. Earth had been conducting massive industrial operations in its outer system, consistent with large-scale military shipbuilding. Long-range sensors detected thermal signatures and electromagnetic emissions that suggested major fleet construction. The evidence appeared to confirm Kelorth's assessment that Earth had gone rogue. The humans had not only rejected galactic integration, but had spent decades building what appeared to be a substantial military force. The scale of their industrial operations exceeded all projections for a single-world civilization, suggesting technological capabilities that could pose a significant threat to galactic security. Valan faced a decision that had implications far beyond Earth's solar system. If the humans were indeed building an aggressive military force, Allowing them to complete their preparations could threaten multiple star systems. The precedent set by galactic civilization's response would influence how other worlds viewed their obligations to the diplomatic process. She authorized increased surveillance and began quiet preparations for a possible containment action. Captain Nkem Achebe moved through the corridors of the EDF battleship Mombasa with the confident stride of someone who had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. The ship represented humanity's best attempt to create a vessel capable of standing against superior alien technology, incorporating every innovation learned from decades of reverse engineering recovered alien artifacts. The Mombasa's design philosophy embodied humanity's pragmatic approach to warfare. Assume your enemy is stronger, faster, and more advanced. Then build something that can survive long enough to hurt them badly. The ship's hull was built in layers, with ablative armor designed to shed energy weapon hits while protecting the internal systems. Redundant life support, backup power systems, and modular component design meant the ship could continue fighting even after sustaining damage that would cripple more elegant vessels. Achebe's crew had trained for every possible scenario, from fleet engagements to boarding actions, preparing to fight an enemy they'd never seen using weapons they didn't fully understand. The ship's AI systems had been programmed with combat doctrines derived from humanity's military history, the accumulated wisdom of every major conflict, from Thermopylae to Gettysburg, updated for three-dimensional space combat and energy weapons. The final readiness report showed green across all major systems. The Mombasa carried enough armament to reduce a moon to debris, enough supplies to operate indefinitely for years, and a crew trained to accept casualties in pursuit of mission objectives. "Captain," his executive officer reported, "we're receiving final deployment orders from Fleet Command." Operation Homecoming represented humanity's complete military commitment. Every ship, every crew, every weapon system built during 50 years of preparation. The fleet's destination was the galactic capital, where human intelligence suggested the aliens were coordinating their invasion plans. The strategy was simple: appear in overwhelming force, demonstrate humanity's capability for devastating retaliation, and demand to know why Earth had been excluded from galactic civilization. Admiral Reese's plan was to prevent a war through a show of strength, hoping that proof of humanity's military capability would force the aliens to negotiate rather than attempt genocide. It was the kind of calculated gamble that had defined human military doctrine since Achebe had joined the service: accept enormous risk in pursuit of decisive results. The fleet entered FTL space as a single unit. 10,000 ships carrying humanity's hopes and fears toward a confrontation that would either save their species or trigger the war they were trying to prevent. Achebe took his position on the bridge, knowing that the next few days would determine whether his crew would return home as heroes or as the first casualties of humanity's last battle. War Marshal Gethrick stood in his command center, reviewing intelligence reports about the growing Devourer threat with the grim focus of someone who understood that galactic civilization faced extinction. The enemy had consumed 19 frontier star systems in the past decade, and every conventional military response had failed catastrophically. The Devourers treated entire worlds as consumables, stripping away everything from atmospheric gases to planetary cores, with a chilling thoroughness that left nothing but empty space behind. The Galactic Fleet had been designed for peacekeeping and deterrence, not warfare against an enemy that viewed destruction as a resource extraction method. Elegant ships built for patrol duties and diplomatic escort found themselves outgunned by entities that would consume it alive for fuel. Weapons designed to minimize casualties were useless against an enemy that didn't recognize the concept of surrender. Gethrick's requests for expanded military production and relaxed rules of engagement had been consistently denied by the diplomatic corps, which insisted that peaceful solutions must be attempted first. The bureaucrats who controlled galactic policy couldn't accept that some threats couldn't be negotiated with, mediated, or managed through proper procedures. They continued to believe that the devourer problem could be solved through the same careful diplomacy that had maintained peace for 8 centuries. The last intelligence suggested that the devourers were preparing for a major offensive that could penetrate into the galactic core, threatening the most heavily populated systems in known space. If the attack succeeded, billions of beings would die, not through conquest, but through the simple process of having their worlds consumed for raw materials. When Gethrick received reports about Earth's military buildup, he saw an opportunity that transcended the diplomatic corps' concerns about rogue civilizations. If the humans were developing aggressive military capabilities in isolation, they might have created exactly the kind of force needed to fight the devourer threat. Their apparent rejection of galactic civilization's peaceful approach could be exactly what was needed to develop effective weapons and tactics. His recommendation to establish immediate contact with Earth contradicted the diplomatic corps' containment policy, setting up a bureaucratic conflict that reflected the deeper philosophical divide within galactic civilization. Gethrick believed that survival required adaptation, even if that meant abandoning the principles that had defined galactic society for centuries. The diplomatic corps maintained that those principles were more important than tactical effectiveness. The debate would have continued for years, following proper procedures and careful deliberation, if the humans hadn't forced the issue by bringing their entire fleet to the galactic capital. The human fleet's arrival at the edge of the galactic capital system was detected by sensor operations who had never seen anything like it. 10,000 ships dropped out of FTL space in a tight, 3-dimensional grid, their hulls scarred by decades of deep space operations and painted in the flat gray of vessels built for war rather than diplomacy. The fleet's combined firepower exceeded the defensive capabilities of most star systems, and their sudden appearance sent shockwaves through the galactic command structure. Admiral Reese's transmission was broadcast on all diplomatic frequencies, carrying a message that was intended to be diplomatic, but couldn't entirely conceal the threat underlying humanity's arrival. "This is Admiral Thara Reese of the Earth Defense Force. We have been monitoring your communications for decades, and are aware of your plans regarding our system. We're here to negotiate Earth status in galactic civilization. We've brought our own chairs." The final statement was meant as a metaphorical threat. Humanity was prepared to fight if necessary, but the aliens took it literally. Supreme Coordinator Valon turned to her aide with genuine administrative concern. Did their invitation not specify that seating would be provided? Check Form 15 Beta guidelines immediately. This feels like another administrative oversight. First we send them to the wrong system, now they think we don't provide proper accommodations. The bureaucratic mindset completely missed the idiomatic threat, while the galactic capital's defenses, designed for deterrence rather than combat, were brought to maximum readiness. The defensive fleet was impressed by peacekeeping standards, but utterly inadequate against the human force holding position at the system's edge. Emergency sessions were convened, diplomatic channels were opened, and the carefully managed machinery of galactic government struggled to process a situation that existed outside their established procedures. The humans had brought the kind of overwhelming force that galactic civilization hadn't seen since the end of the last Great War, and nobody knew quite how to respond. The standoff continued for hours while both sides tried to understand what the other wanted, each interpreting the situation through the lens of their own fears and assumptions. The humans saw confirmation that the aliens had been planning something requiring secrecy and deception. The aliens saw evidence that Earth had indeed become a dangerous rogue civilization that threatened the galactic stability. Dr. Anon found herself serving as humanity's primary translator during the initial contact, finally hearing alien voices directly rather than through intercepted fragments. The conversations that followed revealed the scope of the miscommunication with devastating clarity. The aliens' confusion about Earth's aggressive posture baffled her, since humanity had been responding to what they perceived as obvious hostile intent. The aliens' questions about Earth's non-participation in galactic affairs were equally puzzling, since Earth had never received any invitations to participate. As both sides compared their understanding of the situation, the massive miscommunication began to reveal itself. The aliens had been sending diplomatic communications to empty space for 3 centuries, while humanity had been interpreting desperate defensive preparations against the Devourer threat as invasion planning. Neither side initially believed the other's explanation, since the alternative implied institutional incompetence too massive to be credible. Anon's linguistic analysis of the alien communications revealed the translation errors and context gaps that had created the misunderstanding. But the revelation triggered a profound intellectual crisis. The woman, who had built her career finding patterns in chaos, had to confront the terrifying reality that the pattern she had devoted the better part of her life to deciphering was a phantom created by a coordinate typo and centuries of bureaucratic negligence. The universe wasn't a complex, hostile puzzle requiring brilliant analysis. It was a series of cascading administrative failures so mundane and stupid that they had nearly triggered an interstellar war. For a brilliant analyst, this realization was more terrifying than any invasion. The universe operated on incompetence rather than malice, and human intelligence was powerless against institutional stupidity. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been convened to address the exhilarating Devourer advance, but Earth's fleet holding position at the system's edge transformed the meeting into a crisis management exercise. War Marshal Galactic had been preparing to present casualty projections and request emergency military powers, while the diplomatic corps maintained that proper evacuation procedures must be followed before any aggressive action. Admiral Reese and her diplomatic team presented Earth's perspective on the situation, demanding an explanation for centuries of isolation and apparent preparation for invasion. The humans' evidence of alien communications discussing resource reallocation and frontier consolidation was revealed to be the very defensive measures against the Devourer threat that Galactic had been trying to coordinate. The revelation that Earth's isolation had left humanity unaware of the existential threat facing all galactic civilization shocked the assembled representatives. The humans had been preparing for war against the wrong enemy, building exactly the kind of aggressive military force needed to fight the Devourers while remaining ignorant of their existence. Supreme Coordinator Valon's formal apology to humanity for the bureaucratic error was interrupted by emergency alerts that sent the entire galactic capital into crisis mode. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Devourer fleet approaching the galactic core, larger than any previous incursion, and moving with the systematic determination of a force prepared to consume entire sectors. The galactic fleet, already strained by defending the Outer Rim, was insufficient to repel an attack of this magnitude. War Marshal Galactic's tactical analysis showed that conventional defensive doctrines would result in catastrophic casualties, with minimal impact on the Devourer advance. The galaxy's emphasis on surgical strikes and minimal casualties had proved ineffective against an enemy that treated destruction as a resource. Galactic presented the situation to Admiral Reese with the desperate honesty of someone who had run out of acceptable options. The Devourer's strategy of consuming entire star systems had overwhelmed every defensive measure galactic civilization could deploy. Their technology was self-repairing, their tactics were relentlessly destructive, and their apparent goal was the consumption of all organized matter in the galaxy. The human fleet's aggressive design philosophy and devastating firepower represented exactly the kind of force needed to fight an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with or deterred. Humanity's willingness to accept heavy casualties in pursuit of strategic objectives was precisely the mindset required to fight beings that viewed entire civilizations as consumables. Admiral Reese and War Marshal Gethrick developed a joint strategy that combined galactic intelligence and coordination capabilities with human firepower and aggressive tactics. The plan required the human fleet to engage the Devourers directly, while galactic forces provided support and evacuation for threatened worlds. The strategy horrified galactic officers trained to minimize casualties and preserve expensive equipment. Human doctrine assumed that ships and crews were expendable resources to be used in pursuit of mission objectives, a philosophy that contradicted everything galactic civilization had believed about the nature of warfare. His crews had trained for decades to fight a superior enemy through maximum aggression and tactical sacrifice. The combined human-galactic fleet met the Devourer incursion in the depths of interstellar space, in a battle that would determine whether galactic civilization would survive or be consumed like so many others. The Devourers approached with the soulless purpose of industrial equipment, their vessels more harvesting machines than warships, designed to reduce organized matter to its component elements. Human ships accepted devastating damage to deliver close-range attacks that galactic vessels couldn't survive. The EDF battleship Mombasa led the assault, Captain Achebe directing his crew through a battle plan that assumed their ship was expendable if its destruction achieved tactical objectives. The vessel's ablative armor shed energy weapon hits while internal systems continued functioning, despite damage that would have crippled more elegant designs. Admiral Reese commanded the battle from her flagship, making split-second decisions about which ships to sacrifice and which objectives to prioritize. The human crews fought with the desperation of a species that had prepared for extinction, while their alien allies struggled to adapt to warfare that treated lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of victory. When the Mombasa lost main propulsion and weapons, Captain Achebe ordered his crew to the escape pods and manually piloted his vessel directly into a Devourer's harvesting ship. The collision created a massive explosion that breached the enemy's self-repair systems, proving for the first time that the Devourers could be destroyed through sufficient application of force. The alien commanders watched in horror as Achebe deliberately destroyed his own ship and nearly killed himself to create a tactical advantage. Captain Achebe was later recovered from his escape pod by a stunned galactic rescue crew, who found him calmly running diagnostics on the pod's life support systems. His first question was for a damage report on the remaining fleet. War Marshal Gethrick recognized the cold tactical genius of the maneuver, one damaged ship eliminating a vastly superior enemy vessel. But his staff officers were visibly disturbed by the human willingness to treat their own lives as acceptable losses. The battle's outcome depended on humanity's willingness to pay any price for victory, and the aliens' ability to coordinate that sacrifice effectively. The combined fleet's success came at enormous cost to both human and alien forces, but it proved that the Devourers could be defeated through the kind of brutal, aggressive warfare that galactic civilization had avoided for centuries. The Devourer fleet was destroyed, scattered across 7 light-years of space as debris that would pose no further threat to galactic civilization. The victory had come at enormous cost. Nearly half the human fleet was destroyed or severely damaged, and galactic casualties were proportionally similar. But the battle proved that the existential threat could be defeated through tactics that no single civilization had been willing to employ. Admiral Reese surveyed the aftermath from her damaged flagship, knowing that humanity had earned its place in galactic society through blood and sacrifice. The surviving alien commanders acknowledged that their peaceful approach to conflict would have been insufficient against the Devourer threat, while human officers recognized that their isolated development had left them unprepared for the complexity of galactic politics. War Marshal Gethrick began planning for the long campaign that would be necessary to eliminate remaining Devourer strongholds throughout the galaxy. The victory had transformed both civilizations, forcing the galactic community to accept that some threats required responses that contradicted their fundamental values, while teaching humanity that their aggressive doctrines were most effective when coordinated with galactic intelligence and resources. In the weeks that followed, Earth was formally welcomed into galactic civilization as a full member, with humanity taking primary responsibility for military defense against remaining Devourer threats. The bureaucratic error that had caused the crisis was revealed to the public, leading to comprehensive reforms in the diplomatic corps and the establishment of redundant communication frameworks to prevent future isolation of member worlds. Kelorth faced investigation for his role in the cover-up, but his expertise in frontier communications made him valuable for establishing proper contact with other potentially isolated civilizations. Dr. Anan led the effort to establish comprehensive communication frameworks between Earth and the galactic community, ensuring that future misunderstandings wouldn't escalate to crisis levels. Admiral Reese accepted appointment as Joint Commander of Galactic Defense Forces, bringing human military experience to bear on the ongoing threat from remaining Devourer strongholds. The 10,000-ship fleet that had begun as humanity's desperate response to perceived invasion became the core of a new galactic military designed for aggressive warfare against existential threats. The final irony was not lost on any of the participants. The bureaucratic error that nearly caused a war had ultimately saved galactic civilization by creating the military force needed to confront an enemy that peaceful diplomacy couldn't defeat. The miscommunication that began with a simple coordinate error ended with humanity and the galactic community stronger together than either could have been alone. 1 year later, Earth's first official diplomatic mission arrived at the galactic capital through proper channels, following established procedures for the first time in 3 centuries. The delegation included both Dr. Anan and a reformed Kelorth, who had become an expert in preventing communication failures between species. Admiral Reese, now wearing the insignia of Galactic Command, greeted the new arrivals with dry humor that masked the serious business of ongoing integration. "Welcome to the galactic capital," she said, gesturing to the guest facilities. "The chairs are provided this time." The humor couldn't entirely mask the magnitude of the work ahead. Humanity continued adapting to galactic society while maintaining their crucial role in defending it. Earth's flag now flew alongside those of other galactic civilizations, no longer isolated, but fully integrated into the community they had once feared was planning their destruction. The greatest threats to civilization, they had learned, often came not from malicious enemies, but from the simplest failure to communicate effectively. And sometimes, the most unlikely alliances could emerge from the most catastrophic misunderstandings.